The college football show coming your way on a Tuesday, 4 p.m. Eastern time. Make it part of your college football week, of course, with us. Appreciate you stopping by. Comments, questions are welcome. We've left the call-in line in the chat as well. Believe we're going to talk some Clemson football. Jason Priester from the Clemson Insider scheduled to join us. And if you have not seen, Clemson is on fire. Dabo is having a bit of a chuckle over and over and over and over these days as Clemson is bringing in some top flight recruits. All right, folks, so we're going to go through a number of items here as we do each and every day. And again, Monday through Friday, most weeks. Monday through Friday, most weeks. Monday through Tuesday this week. You will not see us on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday this week on the big show here. Disputed National Champions, that's the book. Please look it up on Amazon, Disputed National Champions, or you can grab the link down in the description section down below. We've got our Iowa show coming up next. I'm in a string of 5 consecutive shows. We did our recruiting show 1 p.m. Eastern, which is typically on, yes, it is. It's always on Tuesday. I'm starting to get these shows mixed up. Always on Tuesday. Tuesday is the recruiting show with Leanne Herring and myself, 1 p.m. Eastern time. And we want to direct you toward our recruiting channel because we're there every week with Leanne breaking down the transfer portal and recruiting across the nation. And we had a 2027 offensive tackle join us for an interview today. Our Ole Miss show, we just wrapped that up, as well as my appearance, which is typically weekly on the Michigan podcast just a few minutes ago. So check that out. Should be posted a little bit later today. My take on Michigan football entering spring practice. I tried to be kind. And of course I was kind because that's my nature. And then here we are with our daily show, the college football show. And then Iowa Live with Corey Brad at 5:30 Eastern. That's coming up at 5:30 Eastern. And again, we'll take your comments and questions there in the chat. And I've got a few things lined up for us to talk about if you are too timid to call, but the call-in line is in the chat. I had planned to look at these win totals on Saturday night. We popped up on Saturday night, which also leads me to another feature here at the Voice of College Football that we are planning on is springing on you in just a few weeks. So people tell me all the time, Mark, we like the late night shows. I hear that all the time. We've kind of veered away from the late night shows recently meaning the last couple of years. And here we are at 4 p.m. Eastern time throughout the week, Monday through Friday. And that doesn't, I guess, take into account that it's even earlier in the day across the board. If you're on the West Coast, it's 1 p.m. Eastern time. It's a late lunch for you. So what we've decided to do, and I think I'm going to let the whole basketball deal, March Madness, all that blow through. And sometime in early April, we will do one late night call-in show with all of you each and every week. How about that? Late night call-in show with the Voice of College Football once a week. You say once a week, when's that going to be? I don't think it's smart to put it on any particular day. I think we'll mix it up, move it around. Maybe we'll leave it up to you. Most weeks we will. We'll say, Joe Blow, when do you want to have the call-in show? Let's take a poll this week. Whatever it may be, we'll come up with a fun way, hopefully, a fun way each and every Sunday to determine when we're going to do the call-in show, the late night call-in show that particular week. And when I say late night, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight, I don't know. I may show up at 3 in the morning. We'll play it by ear. Win totals. Here we go. What do we think of these? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 10.5s at the top of the board with Penn State, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Oregon. Those are all 10.5s. Of course, Penn State and Ohio State play each other, so there's a loss for somebody right there. I have not checked to see whether Penn State plays Oregon. I do not believe they do. Ohio State and Oregon do not play. So we're not going to have a conflict there. But again, Penn State and Ohio State, 2 of the 4 at the top of the board, play each other. So somebody loses there. Then we drop down to the 9.5 category. Tennessee, Bama. There's Clemson. Texas, Georgia. That's the run of 9.5 win teams. According to, where are we? We're on Vegas Insider. And these are various sports books. So we're taking the composite there with 9.5. Tennessee, Bama, Clemson, Texas, also Georgia. Clemson's got a date against LSU to open the season. Bama's big non-conference game. Well, they got Florida State and Wisconsin. I don't recall Tennessee's big out-of-conference game. Texas plays Ohio State. So Ohio State has to deal with Penn State and with Texas. And Georgia's got an extremely difficult schedule from what I remember. Ole Miss sitting at 8.5. Who else at 8.5? Ole Miss, SMU, Michigan, Arizona State. That seems a little high. LSU, I know they just won 10, but that seems a bit high in the Big 12. Arizona State, LSU. Indiana at 8.5. Well, they got 3 gibbies out of conference. Some more 8.5s. Include Texas Tech, Louisville, Miami, and Kansas State are 8.5s. 7.5 goes to Nebraska. Of course, Florida State's going to have to really step it up to hit 7.5 after 2 wins last year. BYU at 7.5. South Carolina, 7.5. Illinois, 7.5. Auburn's at 7.5. That seems a little on the high end. Mizzou only at 7.5. Washington, USC, Iowa State, as you might imagine, a lot of teams at 7.5. North Carolina, Texas A&M. These are basically teams that are going to go 500 in their conference, and then they'll pick up a couple wins outside the conference, and that gets you to 7 right there. Baylor is the last 7.5 win total. And then it drops down to Iowa, Kansas, Utah, Georgia Tech. We had a conversation as we looked at this the other day. We just started to get into it, and then people wanted to talk about something else, so we never really got to the win totals, which I will dive into at some point in terms of my predictions on the betting lines of the win totals. We do have a call coming in from our buddy Nick. Nick, welcome into the Voice of College Football. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Mark. How are you?
I am good. What's on your mind this fine day?
Well, the first thing is, I know you've had Isaiah Hole on your show. Actually, I think a few times, right?
I have, and actually we've traded a few DMs just in the last couple of days, so hopefully he's coming back very soon.
Okay, well, I don't know if you heard. I wanted to make you aware of this because I think you'd be a great guest to have on. He's doing a second podcast that's faith-based, like it's Christian-centered.
Oh, okay. Nice.
And I'm pretty sure, just based on the way you've talked, like about church and everything, obviously you, or maybe you flat out stated, I'm assuming you're a Christian.
I am a Christian. There's
Okay,
no
good.
question about that. Yes, sir.
So I was going to send him a DM actually, and I'm planning on it. Is that to actually specifically request you on there as a guest? Is that something you'd be interested in doing?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Nick. Thanks for
Okay.
thinking of me. Sure.
Cool. Yeah, I know we're all football fans, but podcasts and episodes on those topics are much more important. So I think it'd be fun. So alrighty. Well, yeah. So first, I know kind of the main topic you were diving into was Clemson. Um,
Well, not necessarily. I have a Clemson guest who is scheduled to stop by. That's the only reason I put that on there. But we can certainly talk Clemson football. We can talk anything you'd like.
yeah, I just wanted to. I haven't really followed them super closely. You said they're bringing on, or um, they've been picking up some top recruits then, or is this more like transfer portal?
No, this is high school football recruiting. Yes.
Interesting. What commits? I guess I'm a little, like I said, I'm not really up to speed with them. So they've just been getting like a flurry of commitments or something.
Yeah, they've had about 5 in the last week. I'm looking for them right now
Wow.
just to give you the run is pretty impressive, not just from a quantity standpoint, but we're talking Amari Adams is the 7th rated player in the country, top rated player in the state of South Carolina. Braden Jacobs is an offensive tackle. So they got 2 top 50 guys there at the top of the board. And again, no, I messed this up. My bad. This is 2025. I thought for a second, those names do not look familiar. Here we go. Look at that. Now, this is very early. 12 hard commits, second ranked class in the country. Okay, these names are what we have here. And we just did a recruiting show with Leanne Herring. She was running all these names down with us as well. And again, I had already planned on having a Clemson guy on today, so it kind of just fit together. But man, you're looking at, not at the very top of the board, but those first 4 names, they all got commitments just in the last week or so from 4 roughly two top 200 players. And yeah, so they've been doing well.
Well, good for them. I'm assuming they're the overwhelming favorite to win the ACC coming into next season with all of their returning talent. Aren't they like one of the? I don't know. They might be the top team as far as returning talent goes.
Yeah, if somebody right this second held a gun to my head and said somebody's going to win a conference championship and you need to nail it, I would go Clemson ACC. They would be the biggest favorite for me. Yes.
And to be honest, like Clemson's an interesting storyline. You know what I would agree with that they're going to win the ACC. I don't think they're the most interesting team though in their own conference. I'm really curious to see, as I'm sure you are, what the heck is Florida State going to look like this year? You want to talk about, um, reaching the peak of being undefeated one year and the very next year just a total bottom out. That is going to be fascinating to me to watch what they do, because I guess I can't imagine Florida State putting up with another season like they just had.
Yeah, and to your point, we were just going through win totals, and when you're sizing up, let's say in Iowa, and you give them a win total like Vegas does almost every year at 7.5, that's one of the most predictable win total projections you're going to have in college football. Florida State's on the other end of the spectrum, 13-1 2 years ago, 2-10, which I have asked somebody to find a more egregious drop from one season to the next in the history of college football, because I don't know of one from a 12-0 regular season to 2-10. So I think Vegas is just splitting the difference, since I don't think they have an idea either in putting Florida State at 7.5. They went and got this Boston College quarterback who is not a great player. He's a runner. He's decent. He threatens defenses with his legs, marginal passer. I don't necessarily know that they did a great job there of, upgrading at the position. They bring in Gus Malzahn. It's a very odd move by him to leave his UCF head coaching job and become an offensive coordinator. And maybe he's just going to ride out the rest of his career that way. But they do have a top level mind in Gus Malzahn to run the offense. But their downfall has basically been high school recruiting. is nowhere close of the Jimbo Fisher, Bobby Bowden standard. They have not recruited well out of high school, and then they've had these boomer bust transfer portal cycles, and they had the boom, which led to 12-0, but then they had the bust the next season with DJ Uyangalele and the rest of those guys that all flamed out.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a really good summary. Like I said, I don't really have too much more or any really to add on to that, but just that might be one of the most interesting teams to pay attention to, because I literally do not have any idea. And like you said, that's kind of reflected maybe a little bit in that 7.5. That seems like a totally random number. um, so, but anyway, and then do you have are you leaning towards a favorite in the Big Ten? I know since adding the 4 teams, it's much more challenging. Probably got to think about it quite a bit harder, but
Yeah, so we'll get through spring practice and the spring games, and then I'll be going through all sorts of lists and rankings and so forth, because we'll pretty much be set in terms of personnel. I don't think there's going to be major rumblings in the transfer portal, but there's going to be a lot of player movement, in the 2 deep, not major players, star players, anything like that I'm anticipating. I believe that Penn State should be a slight favorite in the Big Ten.
actually, it's funny you say that. I agree. Last year, I think my view of James Franklin has been well documented so far, so I'm not going to go into that. But I will say I do think there were. Well, I guess the reason why I think or am more concerned, if I'm putting on my Michigan hat, um, even though we don't play them, at least I don't think we play them this year, but um, this is a year that I'm viewing them much more seriously. Um, some of Drew Aller's play down the stretch of last year I thought was very encouraging, um, as far as Penn State fan goes. And some of the plays he made, I know it wasn't against the best competition and whatnot. Um, but yeah, I mean, in my view, this is, if I was a Penn State fan, this is it for James Franklin. It's this year or bust. And I'm not saying like national title or bust. I'm just saying get farther. You know what I mean? Like, even if you just go beyond, win that third game, or if you get a bye, try to just make an appearance in the national title game, or you could say there's probably a good chance that if they make the playoffs, they're going to have a more difficult opponent earlier in the playoffs. So even if it's earlier in the playoffs, just win that game. Like, beat that Oregon team, beat that Ohio State team. If it's Clemson or Texas, beat them. Actually win it. We've seen them have close games, last year against Oregon in the Big Ten title game and everything. But yeah, this year I got a feeling that Penn State's going to be a tough out for anybody.
Yeah, their offensive line is stacked. They lose one player to the NFL who's got like 14 letters in his name. I can't even begin to try to pronounce it. I don't remember how it's spelled, but anyway, he's going to be a top pick in the NFL draft. But other than that, they go 2 deep on the offensive line. Everybody else is back. Those 2 studs at running back, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, are back. Drew Aller's back. Like you, think about this. If Drew Aller played as well against Notre Dame as he played against Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, they would have, I don't want to say they would have blown Notre Dame off the field. They would have won easily in that game. And the way you size it up is interesting, because at first I was about to challenge you, and then you became more specific with your expectations. And I completely agree, because on one hand, a Penn State apologist can say, well, look, they accomplished all this stuff. They had a breakthrough year. They finally made the playoff. They won playoff games. They went to a Big Ten championship game. They won 13 games. They came within a field goal of playing in the national championship game. But the cons are all, this was all basically fabricated by the system. The system allowed them to do all of this. The system determined that they'd make a 12-team playoff. They didn't do anything different. They just made a 12-team playoff that they would have made all these other times, 6 times out of 10 years. They didn't beat anyone in the playoffs that they wouldn't have beaten in all these other seasons, SMU and Boise State. And then when it came down to, okay, Notre Dame, Penn State, there's been this dark cloud over both of these programs in recent years. Like, who's going to finally break through against an elite opponent? Well, they got to play each other, and Notre Dame was the team that advanced. So, yeah, James Franklin still has things to prove.
Yeah, totally agree. And like I said, I don't even care, because I'm not a Penn State fan. If I was, I would care, and it would suck to get blown out in the second or third round of the playoffs. But even if they do get blown out later in the playoffs by a juggernaut, like let's say, for example, I don't think is too far out of the realm of possibility, but let's say Arch Manning and Texas are just a buzzsaw this year, right? Like that very well could happen. If they get pounded by a team like that, or like an Ohio State last year or something like that, that's fine. If you get blown out, I'll still give them credit, even if they got blown out later in the playoffs in embarrassing fashion, if they can just get one of those wins, like one of those wins where you're slight underdogs or big underdogs, or just that. I mean, it's hard to explain, but we all kind of know that victory that's been escaping James Franklin over and over and over again against a top flight team, elite team, whatever. But yeah, I can honestly say it's interesting because we have some college football teams here that now, with the expanded playoff, it's going to be really interesting to watch how universities, their sports department justifies firing a coach, because you're going to have situations where people get sick of a coach for not actually progressing or continuing to elevate and get closer and closer to the national title. But now they're going to be racking up more wins, and it's going to be even harder to justify. You know what I mean? I don't think you can ever move off of a James Franklin team if they're winning 12, 13, 14 games even a year. That's just so hard to justify.
Yeah. On the other hand, I look at places like Tennessee, South Carolina, places like that, Ole Miss now, where in the past, there's not an expectation that they're going to reach a 4-team playoff. It's just too exclusive and elite. But a 12-team playoff, you should be going to a 12-team playoff on occasion at those places. At a place like LSU, Brian Kelly, you should go to a 12-team playoff most of the time. Brian Kelly's starting to wear thin here rather quickly. He's driving, suppressing this program into kind of like this SEC obscurity that's in the middle there with Texas A&M and Missouri, and you're okay, you're fine, you're a good team, you got a lot of talent, you got NFL players on the field, but you're 8-4, and nobody's really paying that much attention to you, and it's not what they're paying for at LSU.
Yeah, are you aware, like, what? I mean, I know a lot of people say this. I don't know number wise. I would agree. A lot of people. I guess why I'm asking this is I'm wondering where LSU's NIL support, like where they rank, or where you've heard that they rank in the SEC, because I think it's a generally understood. Although, like I said, we haven't seen specific numbers. Probably never will, but like now that you have some Big Ten schools jumping in to the NIL game, they have a much larger magazine attached to their gun, is what it appears like, because you're seeing Big Ten schools poach SEC commits, and I actually think it's only going to start happening more. People in the SEC don't want to admit that that the Big Ten is surpass them, let alone even on their level. But I think it's going to be made very clear that the Big Ten is the best conference after this next season. That's my top projection. But Yeah, LSU, I agree. I actually would say Brian Kelly. Well, it's either between him or Mike Norvell, who's who I'm looking at, who's really on the hot seat coming in. Because man, LSU has won some big games, but they have not. I mean, yeah, I mean that fan base expects national championships. Maybe not every year, but they have had a history of a lot of success.
Well, the
So I'm
performance, you bring up Norvell versus Kelly, and it's interesting because there are similarities, but then there are also just stark differences in performance because Norvell, it's a roller coaster. It's transfer portal or bust. Again, like I talked about a minute ago, the high school football recruiting in the state, especially in the state of Florida, but overall for Florida State is nowhere close to their expectations and what they need. Brian Kelly's running a good program. Like he can run a program. He's a smart guy. He's a really good coach, but they didn't hire him to go 9-3 every year. And that's not why he's there. They can pay somebody else to do that and pay them less money. He's paid to win championships. So he's running a decent program. They're chugging along, but they're not winning meaningful games. And think about this. He's been at LSU for 3 years. They've opened this season with a marquee game 3 consecutive years. Florida State loss, and USC loss. They're going to Clemson to open the season. If he loses a fourth consecutive opener to get off to that kind of start in 2025, people are not going to be happy down in the bayou.
Well, and the interesting thing is, I suspected, and I think a lot of people did, when people were making fun of him for me and my family, like that whole thing. Not only was it funny in and of itself, but it's also one of those things you can look at if it doesn't go a coach's way, you could point back on that and think, okay, well, it just was not a good fit. He was trying to be someone that he's not. But there is a big caveat here. He is one of the rare coaches who was at a program that fell on hard times and he completely turned it around, and I would argue reinvented himself. Um, kind of like Jim Harbaugh did, but without the national champion. He didn't get to that elite level. But it was very impressive. So if there's a guy who can turn it around, Brian Kelly has that past experience and past success that so many coaches, it honestly, I think, is what ends up getting them fired when they go through difficult times at a high pressure. They get that big job, that big shot, but there's a ton of pressure. And when they go through rough times, they don't have previous successes to be able to fall back on. So their confidence might get a little shaky. And if that happens, you're cooked. But with Brian Kelly, I don't think there's any reason why he couldn't turn it around at LSU. Um, he's reinvented himself once before, so why couldn't he do it again?
No, it's a good point. And I don't know that a lot of people realize how close LSU was and also Texas A&M, because you look at these final records, Texas A&M finished 8-5, and you think, well, we're close to being a playoff team. They were playing Texas the final day of the season to go to the SEC championship game. And once you get there, obviously you're playing for the playoff. So yeah, the lines are that thin between the haves and the have-nots, and between ultimate success and failure, because these coaches, again, at places like that are expected to win championships. I remember, if we go back close to 10 years when Les Miles got fired at LSU, right around the same time, not too long after Mark Richt got fired at Georgia. And I would be asked, are those guys good coaches? Well, I think one of them was a really good coach, Mark Richt. Les Miles, not so much. But the job that they were doing in regards to wins and losses on the field were similar. No, they were both highly successful. However, they weren't paid to be highly successful, like top 10 or 12 in the country. They were being paid top 3 to 4 money in the country to win championships and compete for championships virtually every year, and they couldn't get it done. So then you move on from there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's going to be really interesting how this pans out. I also think it's going to be really interesting. I was a bit surprised where Ohio State I believe it was ESPN's preseason rankings, or offensive defensive ratings for Ohio State. They're ranked number 1 or 2 now. A lot, some of that's going to be, Ohio State's a program that reloads, not rebuilds, and they're still going to have a ton of talent. They recruit at an elite level, but man, there's a lot of Big Ten teams, top 10 teams that are, top of the food chain in the Big Ten, that are all going to be breaking in new quarterbacks. That is a rarity, at least from what I can remember. You have obviously much more college football history knowledge than I do, so I'm sure there's comparisons. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I'm assuming it's going to be if I were to guess, I'd assume it'd be Julian Sayin for Ohio State.
Yeah,
Obviously,
that's the betting favorite. Yes.
And then Dante Moore for Oregon.
Yes.
I know people have been saying, "Oh, he's lighting it up in practice, lighting it," and that's great. He's a highly recruited kid, but I'll believe it when I see it with him specifically. So we'll find out. And then this is just my opinion. I actually just was paying more close attention to Michigan's schedule. With Bryce Underwood at the helm, I don't think there's any game that they can't win. I'm not saying they're going to go undefeated, but I look at their schedule, and there's not like a game that you can point at that you're like, oh yeah, like Michigan's not, like, they'll be a 10-win team, but these 2 games they're for sure going to lose. Because like in the past, you would have said one of those teams was Ohio State, but that's not the case anymore. And for all my fellow Michigan lovers out there in the chat, I know it's a fun conversation to have between Bryce Underwood and Mikey Keene. Well, all I'm saying is, if Bryce Underwood is even half of what recruiting analysts are claiming he is, it's not going to be close. There's no way that you can have a guy that talented sit on the bench. Like, if he pans out, and some people have been saying, well, experience, but Michigan's offensive line has question marks. All of that's true. But like they're saying, well, we don't want Bryce to get killed behind a terrible offensive line. That's been a prominent argument of Michigan fans to not start Bryce Underwood right away. And I'm like, wait a second. Do you know how big of a dude Mikey Keene is? Like, he's a little dude. Who's more likely to get killed behind an offensive line? Mikey Keene or Bryce Underwood? Like, so
the
I
only
don't
reason
know.
I'd counter that, Nick, is that you don't want to get Bryce Underwood in particular killed.
Yeah, that's fair. But I think Mikey Keene is a little mobile. But again, with Bryce Underwood, you're talking about a dude who is a level of talent that is supposed to be able to overcome something like that, to a degree, obviously to a degree. But I don't see it. That's my prediction. What's looking is like it's going to be a debate, or not a debate, a bet with TJ over at the Michigan channel.
Okay.
He's going to wait till spring game. I don't need to wait. I think it's going to be Bryce Underwood. I don't think it's going to be close.
Okay.
But
Do
hey,
you ever check out the Michigan podcast?
Steve Dace?
Steve Dace, yeah.
Yeah, I watch that a lot. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so we just got done recording. So he was asking me all those questions, what I would do, and my evaluation of Michigan going into spring practice. So I give a pretty definitive take on Bryce Underwood and what I would do. If everything that you just stated and others is true, and it most likely is, they just handed him that much money. Obviously, he's that talented. What I would do, as long as he can just as long as he is not a train wreck of running the offense, as long as he's going to capably run the offense and make capable decisions, and he's not freaking out there. And I can't imagine that that's his makeup. I know what I would do.
Yeah. And like I said, I just, from a physical standpoint, he's going to make mistakes. And you actually kind of want that to happen. I'd much rather Bryce Underwood throw 2 interceptions against New Mexico than against Michigan State on October 25th. Like, and I think most people are like that. That's probably goes without saying. But a lot of Michigan fans are concerned, like, oh, he's going into Norman, Oklahoma. That's going to be, we can't have him throwing picks in that game. And I'm like, well, that's not necessarily true. Like if he is, and we keep saying this, what they say he is, I've seen some services comparing him to Vince Young. I think that's totally disrespectful to Vince Young, and that's a ridiculous expectation to put on a 17-year-old. But if he's in that Trevor Lawrence, once every 10-year type talent, I don't care if he throws 2 picks against Oklahoma, because if he is that talent, it won't matter, because he'll probably finish the game throwing for 4 touchdowns and 350 yards, and then you win the game. Like, when you're dealing with talents like these, I just think it's all about reps. You have that perfect opener. New Mexico is going to be terrible. Michigan's going to easily win that game. Bryce should get a ton of even if he doesn't start, Bryce should get a ton of snaps in that game. And I don't know. I don't really buy into the whole narrative that because we approach things a specific way in the past with a 5-star quarterback, that is exactly how we should do it with this guy. I think it's totally individual, and I think if Bryce Underwood, he's a far more highly regarded and coveted talent than JJ was coming out of high school. I don't know. I'm not afraid of throwing him into the fire, for all it's worth. That is just not a concern of mine at this point. So,
well, again, depending on what is out there on display during spring football and August camp, I'm in your boat that if he can reasonably run the offense, and I'm not talking about to perfection and doesn't make mistakes, he can make mistakes. He would be out there from day one for me.
yep, totally agree. And then can I ask you one more question? Or if you if you need to get to other stuff, I can absolutely let you go. This one is not as serious, but I've heard a couple comments, and I think I may have brought it up once to you, about you being your position on the Rose Bowl being the permanent destination for the college football national championship. I don't want to say you said it was stupid. Maybe you did, but at the very least, your position right now is you're totally against that, correct?
Yes, I'm totally against it. I probably did use the term stupid. I'll draw back from that. I don't want it, by extension, it sounding like I'm calling people stupid that want that. I understand the Rose Bowl, I believe, is the greatest destination in college football, but I don't think it should be the permanent place to play a championship game. Southern California, that particular field, that particular stadium, held to that degree that it has to be played there every year. Why subject the rest of the country to that setting all the time, and then also just make that a benefit to that area and that region, that city, every year?
Yeah, it's actually funny. Okay, so now you might actually be kind of changing my opinion live right here, because I was just thinking of this. So your position, now let me ask you this. You, you're against the Rose Bowl being the permanent destination, not because there's anything wrong with the Rose Bowl itself as
No,
a venue, but because you don't believe college football in general should have one location
no,
as the
it's
national title.
exactly. It's not
Okay.
the Vatican for the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's one of many. It would be in the rotation. It would be like the Super Bowl. And I
Yeah.
think that's one thing that college football generally got right once they devised a national championship game, is that it got moved around to various venues. Uh, if weather were perfect in the NFL, would they be playing every NFL championship game, Super Bowl, at Lambeau Field? I just, I don't, I understand that the decision's been made. Okay, the Rose Bowl was the greatest bowl game in the history of college football. For the entire history of college football, it was the first, it was the greatest. Of course, it was the granddaddy. Therefore, we're going to try to hold on to the past and kind of make this transformation of the Rose Bowl into the new. It's the championship game now. It's been the greatest bowl game. Now we're going to make it the championship destination. I I understand the thought process. I just don't think we should be that exclusive. I think that we need to allow other parts of the country to take part in hosting the national championship game.
Yeah, and you could also come at it from the other angle. If you make the Rose Bowl the permanent national title, the chances of some of the more underdog teams getting to play in that game and experience the glitz and the glamour, as Steve says, the America of old Americana. You know, if you have that, as I'm assuming it's going to be at least one of the playoff games every year, it'd be nice to have other fan base because that game for so long was reserved for the Pac-10, Pac-12, whatever, and the Big Ten. Um, and now we're in an era where it would be cool to see a Boise State fan base or an underdog or an SMU get a shot to play in that game on that stage. If you make it the last game of the year, those teams are probably not going to make it that far. So,
I'm actually going to make a point for the other side because this might be in their argument as well. I get the anticlimactic atmosphere of you just won the Rose Bowl. Okay, but this isn't the end of the season. You got to go on, you got to play this other game, and then this other game, like Ohio State just did against Oregon, where the Rose Bowl. But you could say the same thing about the Orange Bowl, the Sugar Bowl. To SEC fans, the Sugar Bowl is their Rose Bowl and has been their Rose Bowl for decades. So college football in some aspects has been forever ruined, and it's just part of it
agreed.
progressing, depending on your outlook, either it progressing or it's just changing for the worse. But some things will never be the same.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I get it. I would say, I mean, I'm never going to claim to be one of those people who would be let down. Like, oh man, we won the Rose Bowl, and now we got to go. Oh, we got to go play for a national title. This sucks. Like, I'm not going to be one of those. I'm being a bit facetious, but yeah, I mean, I get it though. From one of the arguments I will disagree with you quickly on is you were kind of talking about the like it shouldn't be I guess at least I thought you were talking about it shouldn't be the permanent destination for the college football national championship because the area outside of the football stadium is not special. um eh, I will say this just in general, watching your team and experiencing a Rose Bowl game, just that environment, the suns, the mountains, the it's just a very iconic stadium, and I don't really think it matters, or I don't even think a lot of people care about what city a stadium's in or this or that. I don't think those details matter. But again, that's just a small detail. I disagree with you in the past on, but then you clarified your position, which I actually agree with. So
There is an economic benefit to the area.
yeah, and California definitely doesn't deserve that. So so
And
that's all I'll
also,
say.
doesn't it make it a little bit more special when it hits the rotation where it goes to the Rose Bowl? Imagine if we're 25 years from now and the national championship games always played at the Rose Bowl every year. I don't know if it may lose a little luster. I think it just creates a little bit of a unique vibe and flavor when it moves around New Orleans, Miami, LA, wherever else we may go with it, Dallas, Atlanta, and actually be played in the North, can be
Yeah.
played in a dome in Indianapolis or Minneapolis. Yes.
Yeah, and I will say now just by the rotating schedule, I think if we keep going, we're gonna probably expand even further. I'm assuming the Rose Bowl is gonna eventually be the title game, correct? At least in 1 year. I mean,
Oh,
theoretically, it could.
absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Well,
And actually, Nick, just to turn the question in a different way, if someone asked me if it had to be in one place, only one place, I would select the Rose Bowl.
yeah, yep, yeah. I actually agree with that, but I agree with you on. You changed my mind a bit. I think to keep I just think it'll keep things fresher if you just keep rotating. There's not necessarily a need. I mean, honestly, it's true with most things. Too much of a good thing can be bad. So, in a way, you could argue that if that's the permanent destination every year and you know that's going to be the title, I don't know. It'd still be awesome. I don't want to say that any national title game is not going to be awesome, but it might get stale after a while. Who knows? But last note, and I'll leave it here. There will come a day when Michigan and Ohio State will meet in the Rose Bowl, and I'm dreaming of that game. And I would give you a word of friendly advice. That's going to be so big. You better start preparing now for that analysis, because my goodness, we know it's going to happen. I don't know if Michigan and Ohio State will ever meet for an actual national title. I actually think the odds of that are pretty low, just because there's so much that has to go right, and luck, honestly, just injury luck involved. But I am absolutely geared up and rooting for Michigan State, oh geez, Michigan. Forgive me, Michigan fans. There was just a fight between Michigan State in basketball, so those punks down the road are on my mind. But no, Michigan and Ohio State, I would love to see a rematch in the playoffs. I know maybe if I was a player on the team, I wouldn't want to rematch a team that I just beat with such high stakes. Um, but maybe that's not fair, because these guys are alphas and they'll play anybody anytime. But I can't wait. It'll be a fun year. It's good. There's a lot of storylines, and hopefully we get even more smaller area teams, some underdogs that actually make a serious run in this thing. I think it'd be great for the sport. So, but anyway, Mark, I will leave it at that. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks, Nick. Have a good day.
You too.
Appreciate Nick stopping by, of course, to talk. Well, we made the rounds, did we not? Clemson, Michigan, the national championship game site. Yes, I know there's been a push for the Rose Bowl to be the exclusive site. I do not agree with that. If it is chosen as such, I will not throw a fit. I am not dying on that hill. It's not that important to me, like other causes, even within college football. But I will state that I believe that the game should move around to various destinations, stadiums, and it creates a more interesting flavor. And of course, all areas of the country would be represented. I know that the Rose Bowl is the granddaddy of them all. And again, I will reiterate that if there was only one destination and it could only be one place, that's the one I would select. But do we really consider Southern California to be representative of college football? Southern California, representative of college football. Okay. We were hoping to get in some Clemson talk today. Let's see, it's almost 5 o'clock. I've got about 20, 25 more minutes. We got Corey Brada and the Iowa Show coming up at 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central. I highlighted a comment and then I got sick of seeing it, so I went away from it, and I probably am not going to be able to find it again. There, I did. I bleed orange. Okay. Really? Putting Tennessee into Ole Miss category, Mark? No way. You just did that. Okay. I did do that. I'm not talking about historically. I'm not making a comparison between Ole Miss's football accomplishments historically and Tennessee's. There's no comparison. Tennessee has a greater football program all time than Ole Miss. Not talking about all time. Talking about right now. And I'm not just talking about like one season Ole Miss was able to max out its resources and its personnel and its talent and just barely reach the level of Tennessee. I bleed orange. Look in the rearview mirror and look at Tennessee's football performance over the last 15 years. Tennessee's football performance over the last 15 years has not been as good as Kansas State's football performance over the last 15 years. Tennessee over the last 15 years has been West Virginia, Minnesota. Now, again, be clear. I'm not saying that Tennessee historically all time, it's the second greatest program in the history of the SEC all time. Second most championships, winning percentage, on down the line. Now with Texas involved, but they didn't win in the SEC. I'm talking about current members of the SEC who have been long-standing members. It's Alabama's number one by far, and Tennessee is probably had a second place standing that's been diminishing, of course, with the likes of LSU and Georgia catching up with them. I'm not talking historically. I'm talking about what's going on right now. That Tennessee and Ole Miss are on the same level right now. They are. And if anything, Ole Miss would have a claim as to being a better program right now over a stretch of time. Not talking about just last year's team. The Tennessee went 10-2 and Ole Miss went 9-3. So Tennessee's better. Well, they based on postseason results, of course, went 10-3, both of them. But I would say that Josh Heupel has a little bit more to prove than Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin has established Ole Miss as a program that's winning 9, 10, 11 games every year. They just won a Fiesta Bowl 2 years ago. So I think I can capably argue the point that they're on the same level right now. There it is, Red Buckeye. I made a similar analysis about Miami football a couple of years ago and posted a video and went through all the numbers since like 2004. And Miami basically was playing exactly 7-5 football. That's exactly who they were. Like if you looked at Miami's winning percentage over the last 20 plus years, 7-5 is like a 58% winning percentage. And that's exactly what Miami's done. So they're a 7-5 team. That's what Tennessee's been over the last 15 years. They've been a 7-5 team. Now, Red Buckeye said since 1998. Now, Tennessee was really good for about 4 or 5 years after that. They should have played in the 2001 national championship game, but could not beat LSU in the SEC championship game. All right, welcome into the Voice of College Football. Timothy, how you doing?
Hey, how we doing?
I'm good.
I actually called in, I think Friday or Saturday night.
Yes, sir.
And so we were discussing trying to find a way to put the best teams in the playoff. And you also kept discussing how you were surprised. A lot of people kept kind of undermining the conference championship, kind of giving it no value as of, I guess, recently.
Well, not to nitpick, just to clarify, I believe I was talking about how we could hopefully devise a system where teams would earn their way into the playoff as opposed to selecting who we think are the best teams.
Yes. Yep. I completely agree with you. Okay, so, and we were discussing how there's too many teams in the Big Ten and the SEC at the moment for conference games to really matter because everybody can't play each other.
Correct.
There's just not enough games. So they need to go back to what they were doing in the past, the East and West. There's still flaws to that system.
Sure.
But you can go back. I've written all this down. You can go back to as far as 2018, and I can still make it make sense if they go back to East and West. It's really hard to argue for the Big Ten for what I'm about to pitch, but with the addition of UCLA, USC, Washington, and Oregon, it's actually really hard to argue once they're actually added to the equation. But the way it would work, and you can pick any year from 2018 until now, except for I don't pick COVID year. I don't pick 2020. I have no numbers for that. But like if we go back to 2019, SEC is broken down to East and West. And the conference championship game would have been Georgia versus LSU. they still want to have the conference championship game have meaning. That's why they gave it the play-in, the automatic bid, possible
Mhm.
bye. So I think the way to continue to give it meaning is to expand it into a conference playoff. And instead of putting Georgia versus LSU, the East versus West, number one, you would put the number one in the East, Georgia, versus the number three in the West, which at the time was number 14, Auburn. And you would put the number two in the East versus the number two in the West, which was Florida, who was 11-2, versus Alabama, who was 11-2. And then the third team in the East was Tennessee. They were 8-5. They would go against LSU, who was undefeated at the time. They would go on to win the national championship.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it
they
would
were
give
7-5 at the time of this format. At the time, you just mentioned that Tennessee finished 8-5. Well, they won a bowl
Yep.
game. They were 7-5
Okay.
at that point. But I'm trying to hang with your without having graphics or a visual. It's kind of I'm just trying to hang with your concept. Keep
So
going.
what it does is it gives the SEC 3 guaranteed spots in the playoffs.
Okay. Yeah.
You'll do the same thing for the Big Ten. And when you break down the SEC, there'd be 6 conference playoff spots. There's 16 teams.
May I
Actually,
interrupt since we just concluded with the SEC? I've got a question about the SEC.
yeah.
So, are those 3 spots going to be based on the entire season? Of course they are, but I mean, if you're the number 1 seed in the SEC and it's not even close, you're undefeated, you're the number 1 team in the country,
Yep.
you're not losing your spot based on losing that game, correct?
Well,
Or are you?
there is a chance, but no, I would say no,
Okay.
because there's still 3 wild card spots, like in the formula
Okay.
that I have, where the
Okay.
college football committee can still put people in.
Okay.
So it still leaves a spot for Notre Dame. And yeah, if somehow like Georgia or Alabama were to slip up, they could still get voted in, and that would put 4 SEC teams in the playoff.
So this 7-5 Tennessee team, if they win that one game, they get into the playoff automatically?
Yeah, and the college football committee would determine you got to expand to 16 for the 16 teams in the playoff for this to actually happen. But if that were to happen, yeah, Tennessee they'd possibly be a 16 seed. And that year it was who's number 1 at this time? It's Alabama. Alabama, if they win, they're probably going to be the number 1 seed. But yeah, Alabama would probably just end up facing, or hold on, I'm on the wrong page. It's Clemson. It's 13 now. Alabama would probably end up facing them. The 7-5 Tennessee would probably face Clemson. But the way I have it set up is 3 teams SEC, 3 teams Big Ten, 2 teams ACC, 2 teams Big 12. That's 10 teams. And then I was discussing 3 teams from the group of 5. And if 3 teams from the group of 5 were to make it, that's less than 5% of all the teams in the group of 5. And I went back to 2018, and every year except for this past year, there's been 3 teams that were at least 11-2 that won their conference championship. So it's not like it's an 8-5 Toledo.
Okay. Well, that's where we're going to have a problem. Keep going.
And if they were to actually do that, what would happen is the group of 5 conferences would play their conference championships. And then right now there's only 5. It would be group of 6 once the Pac-12 actually gets an additional team, because they're not going to be considered a power conference. There's no way. So the way it would work now is Boise State would be put in, and then the other 4 conferences would advance to the weekend of the Army-Navy game. And they would face each other. So Boise would get in. It would be Army facing Jacksonville State and Ohio facing Marshall. the winners of those games during the Army-Navy weekend would advance to the tournament. And that would be a true 16 versus 1, 15 versus 2, similar to like college basketball. And it would give every conference the chance to make the tournament. And it would give conference championships meaning. They'd actually have a purpose. They would give you a chance at making the tournament.
So back to the first explanation on the SEC. Those 3 games that are played, they're not followed up with a conference championship game. Those are just 3 games that are played on the final weekend.
Yeah, just being the number one seed in your conference, instead of being rewarded the conference championship game, you're going to be rewarded the 3rd seed from the West or the East, the opposing conference.
So when you said
the easier matchup.
So when you said bring meaning to the conference championship games, what conference championship games are you talking about? Just the group of 5?
All of them, because
You're only going to have some, correct?
Well, the expansion of the Power Four is a conference playoff, and it actually gives more meaning to the national championship than a conference championship, because the way they've clearly valued the tournament more than the conference championships, and they're just trying to hold on to the conference championships. But even at the moment, they don't make any sense with the current format that we have. So it's to try to make the conference championships have actual meaning. And instead of having teams voted in, you would have a conference playoff. And that's conference playoff is just conference championship weekend. It's just an expansion. Because you can't have a legit conference tournament like it's basketball. But this invites more teams to the actual playoff of 16 if they expand to 16.
Okay. Well, first of all, how do you determine who the conference champion is? And maybe you don't care. Maybe that's the answer.
I think that's the answer, because at this point it's just a banner or a pennant. I think people care more about the national championship than they do conference championship. And my argument would be Ohio State.
Sure. So we no longer have any. So I don't even really know why we have conferences at this point. If you're not going to have a conference championship, it's just a way of scheduling teams.
The conferences, they're kind of, if the way I'm breaking them down, I'm kind of just turning them into divisions, like it's in the NFL, and I'm still giving way more meaning to the SEC, Big Ten, ACC, and Big 12 over the group of 5, because we discussed this last time. One of the big issues with the playoff is there's a bonus that goes to the teams that make it to the Final Four, and the SEC and the Big Ten are trying to get that bonus. That's why they really want 4 teams apiece in the tournament, and I don't blame them.
Well, they believe that their TV ratings and the quality of their teams justify it. And they're definitely right on the TV ratings, and they're probably right on the quality of the teams.
Definitely, yeah, tough to not argue. And I think this actually helps me a little bit, because I think the SEC and the Big Ten if they go to 16 teams, I think the SEC and the Big Ten will almost always, probably 2 out of every 3 years, they'll have the 1-2 seed. I just think that's how it's going to be. But if they go to 16, that would give Oregon an easy, or Ohio State, whoever's going to be the 1 seed, an easy ride if they're going to face an 11-2 Miami, Ohio out of the MAC in the first round. And then number 2 seed Georgia could face number 19, 11-2 Raging Cajuns. And the only way these these group of 5 teams will ever make it to the Final Four is if they win 4 games in a row, because they got to win their conference championship, and then they got to win the very next week against the conference champion of whatever conference is chosen to face them out of the group of 5. And then they got to win the first round. And the first round's probably going to be versus a 1 or 2 seed. And if they somehow manage that, they still got to win one more game to get to the Final Four. But it creates a Cinderella story. And if someone can do it, I think we're still like, if it were to happen 8 to 10 years away, one team, I still think it would be a Cinderella story. And the only way to get a Farley Dickerson team, like something like that, into the playoff is to give the conference championship meaning, like for the group of 5. And if you were to open up just 3 spots to the group of 5, the odds of you getting an 11-win team filling each spot is extremely high, because there's 3 11-win teams winning their conference in the group of 5 every year since 2018, except for one.
The best group of 5 team is at best the 15th best team in the country. Something in that range.
Though there's one year, Cincinnati, they made the playoff of 4, but they're in the Big 12 now.
Exactly. That was going to be my next point. We're actually, it's ironic, and I've stated this a number of times, that at the time in which we take the best programs out of the group of 5, UCF, Cincinnati, Houston, that we now award the group of 5 with a entry into the playoff, an automatic entry. I think 3 is way too many.
The only reason I would even argue 3 is because I think there's going to be 6 conferences, and there's an easy play-in situation to determine who the best 3 are. And it's winning 2 games in a row, winning your conference championship.
I appreciate your thought process in going through all this, but I think it's not a valid justification, because the math works that we're going to put 3 group of 5 teams in. I don't think that that's a good justification for putting 3 group of 5 teams in. Just because you can devise a system that works.
And the way it also works is with the conference playoffs. It gives 20 teams from the Power 4 a chance to make the playoffs without being voted in. That's the whole point of like adding the group of 5, is because it gives those games meanings across the whole board and all of Division I football. And I don't know. I just don't think 3 is that crazy, because especially like if you set it up the way I have it set up for last season, every team to make the conference playoff from the Power 4 was ranked except for Iowa. Every single one.
So we currently have a system where there is 1 guaranteed group of 5 out of 12, and we're going to expand that to 3 out of 16. Yeah, that is, I just think the disparity in the 2 levels of football is way too high.
And it's a clear win to get in. Like, it's a clear path to get in.
Sure.
And the odds of you putting in a bad team are almost just non-existent.
Really?
Almost.
2 years ago, the best, according to the rankings, the best group of 5 team was Liberty. And they went to the Fiesta Bowl and lost by 40 points.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Liberty, they would be probably a 13 seed, but they would be a legit 13 seed.
But there would be 2 other group of 5 teams that would have made it that year.
And that's exactly why they would be the 16 and the 15 seed. It would almost be a cakewalk for Oregon and maybe Georgia, but I think it's more important to have them play on opening week than it is to give them a bye and lose again, just because we saw how detrimental the bye was in the playoff last season. All 4 of them lost.
Well, I think we need to see that play out more than just one season. I think we jumped to too many conclusions.
I would say that the issue
3
isn't,
of them were playing better football teams. one of them was
Yeah.
playing a team just as good, meaning Georgia and Notre Dame was a toss-up. The other three were playing better teams.
Georgia Notre Dame toss up. Yeah, Georgia had the backup quarterback. But the reason I'm not saying that they lost simply because of the bye. I do think that played a big factor. But I think from the time they play their conference championship game until they started the actual playoff, it was like 3 weeks. And the conference championship winners, they end up getting 2 weeks off. And the other guys that just get voted in, they get 2 weeks off too. So they get 2 weeks off, and then they get a week to warm up and go play somebody. And then they run into somebody that's, they've had 2 weeks off too, but they're just not ready to go. The whole 2 weeks off is they can't do that. They got to start the playoff faster. But they want the conference championship games. So they're going to, and what's funny is Ole Miss even said it. The Ole Miss coach, he was like, I don't want to go to the conference championship game because I feel like I'm being punished. Like, if we lose, we're still
Sure.
probably going to get voted in.
All right, Timothy, I appreciate the call. I better run to this next call here.
All right.
Thanks for stopping by.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, Defiant is checking in today.
Mark, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Mark. Doing good. How does conference championships have no meaning nowadays? Like, these guys play 12, 13 games and want to make a conference championship. That's the reward they get out of playing the season. So
Yes.
how can conference championships have no meaning nowadays? They have more meaning than they ever did before. In terms
Well,
of having a
I
bye.
think I'm not going to make a determination on that. I think that caller, I believe, means, as others do, that they don't have a tangible meaning in that they don't advance your cause toward winning the playoff. Like, they're attaching the conference championship meaning to how that can advantage you in the playoff, not
I mean,
for the sake of winning a conference championship. To me, it's still about that winning a conference championship should be meaningful in that you proved that you were the best team in the conference for the regular season.
oh yeah, I agree. And like, this is a great time to be a fan right now. March Madness is coming up, and for my playoff system, I would expand it to 16, but have the four lowest ranked teams playing not a bye, but a play-in game, and then go from 14 from then on forward.
Run that by me again. You would have how many?
So I will have
Go
I
ahead.
have 16 teams. I have 16 teams, and the four lowest ranked teams will have a play-in game for the final two spots. So afterwards, it'd be 14.
And then what would you do with a 14? You'd have to have buys.
Yeah, I'll have buys for that as well. Yeah.
How would those be determined?
Those be in March Madness, you have the four lowest ranked teams. Most of them are conference champions. So I will have the lowest conference champion play in the playing game, depending on where they ranked at.
But once you get to the 14, who gets a bye?
It'll be the other conference champions will have a priority.
Okay.
And then you would play like how you would have the top two teams have a bye. And then you would play like a regular 14-team bracket.
Who determines who gets these buys?
Well, I would have a committee.
Okay.
Definitely would not have a committee do it because again,
Okay.
I would not. Yeah, I would not have a committee. I would fire all those people in the committee. I would not have a committee. I will have some type of system. I will have some type of system. Yeah, I will have some type of system that could get these rankings to be not perfect, but better. Whatever that system is, I don't know. But I would have a system in place that's not a committee.
Okay. Well, Defiant, I got to move on because we got another show coming up. But yeah, I certainly have displayed my system in the past, and maybe I'll tweak it and do that again. But I would like to get rid of having committees select teams.
Hmm. Yeah, because you need some object. You don't need people to be biased. That's what kind of the problem is. Everybody's biased towards something, and you need some not really unbiased something system in place.
All right, Defiant. Well, I appreciate you calling.
Yeah, Mark. Thank you.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.
The College Football Show. We're here Monday through Friday, except this week I'm off Wednesday and Thursday and also Friday. And so we will see you next Monday. I'm going to the Iowa show next. And also keep in mind for you late night people that starting sometime in early April, maybe the first week of April, maybe we clear out the Final Four. We are going to announce a late night show once a week. Why we can't announce that right now is because it's not going to be the same time every week. It's not going to be the same day every week. We're going to move it around. And we'll come up with fun ways to determine when that's going to be selected, how it's going to be selected, and the final outcome of our late night show each and every week. All right, I'm headed to the Iowa channel. So just follow me over there to the Iowa channel because we're going to talk Hawkeyes for the next hour with all of you. So appreciate you stopping by. And again, we will see you in about 10 minutes on the Iowa channel for Hawkeyes Live.